And now, getting to our main topic today here on Mastering Dungeons, we are going to take a break from our world building and campaign building to discuss the new role playing game from Critical Role and Darrington Press. It is called Daggerheart. It is currently in the playtest phase, and Teos and I have both now had the chance to playtest it. So we are going to give our first impressions based on our playtesting. What is Daggerheart? It is a fantasy role-playing game from Darrington Press, the publisher that's associated with Critical Role. And a very smart team at Demiplane has done an incredible job creating a character sheet and rules compendium and dice roller that will undoubtedly help people play more easily. I can say for a certainty that I probably would not have done this playtest if I had not been able to just create a character in literal minutes with Demiplane. So good job, Demiplane.
Beautiful interface, which I understand they did really quickly. It's gorgeous. I love it. If you haven't seen the Demiplane interface for Daggerheart, do it just to see it. Like, it is so good, and then make a character. But it is really impressive and quite the asset. Good job, Demiplane.
Yeah, because I said I don't have time to read all the rules. I'm just going to go to Demiplane, but the interface is so nice. You just click a button and it brings up that section of the rules. So I probably read most of the player facing rules for at least one of the classes and not races, but species, ancestry, etc. But I got a lot of those rules just through that interface.
And, what you're saying is not untrue, particularly because there are 316 pages to this playtest. This beta doesn't just cover making a character. It covers world building. It covers all sorts of topics. How to create a one-shot together, and it gives you setting information and all sorts of stuff. It is a lot.
Yeah. As opposed to the games where all of your rules for your class, say, or race are on one page, this is definitely not that. No. This is a in-depth, detailed, highly mechanically complicated game.
Which is surprising, right? On one hand, I get it, because if you think of how Critical Role plays, they play in sort of complex ways with a lot going on and a lot driving the action. So I can see the complexity, but I think I just thought, okay, this is going to be a much smaller thing, sort of like the feel of maybe how Candela Obscura was, which I think we got like a 28-page quick start piece and as a kind of preview playtesty kind of thing, and no, this is meaty.
Yeah. And if I'm going to jump right to the heart of the matter, my initial playtest went very well. So I like both story and crunch, right? I like to have the story be dramatic and the characters' personalities and backgrounds matter to the story, both narratively and mechanically. I love that. To players who think they want a crunchy mechanical system, not every crunchy mechanical system will scratch the itch that they want.
Sure. Yep.
So this is a crunchy mechanical system. I wonder if it will serve the audience that it's intended to serve while still gaining play with the people that just want a nice crunchy mechanical system to play around with, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There's different types of crunch, and there's the crunch. I mean, third edition, right, with its feat trees and this stacks with that, and power tack calculations. And then there's games where you just sort of do these technical choices. That it's not the same type of mind engagement, and that can be different for players. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So before we get into the core system and the rules, how was your experience with the game?
It was fun. I talked about a little bit, and you can see the video where we played on the D20 Play channel. Tom's an excellent DM. He sort of took his cut at the initiative system, even with the previous iteration of this playtest. It's now on its kind of second 0.3 version.
Right.
So we didn't kind of deal with the you can just do whatever you want on your turn. He did give everybody an initiative turn. But other than that, we got a good feel for the game through the playtest that they have released for the game. I found it was not what I expected, in that I thought a Critical Role game was going to be a lot more open and narrative. And in fact, they say this is a narrative game, and then they proceed to detail so many levels of crunch. And I was really surprised by that crunch, like the level to which we were supposed to track tokens and chits and things like that made it hard to play online. Like you kind of need an interface to track it for you. I wanted physical tokens. I found myself wanting to do things even on my own turn. I wanted like little bits that I could put in piles and then count them later. And there are a lot of systems that are sort of doing double weight. Like we talked about complex systems, all the things integrate into other things, and the currency, there are several currencies and they do various things. And you have to I had to make a cheat sheet for my own character sheet to really understand when I attack, what are the decisions I'm making? When I'm rolling a skill, certain skills, what are the decisions I'm making? That complexity was actually something I really like. So I sound negative about it. I do like it. I just don't think most people like it, and I could be wrong. But I suspect that it's a meatier thing than many people want, and it will get in the way of the purpose or goal of being a narrative system and narrative game. Because your brain is tied up in all this currency stuff rather than, like Apocalypse World or something like that, where you're just making decisions because it's what you think your character should do and would do. You start playing this currency game, and that can take you away from that. Same thing for the GM. The GM has to focus. A lot of brain power is being spent on tracking these currencies rather than thinking about the next cool thing the monster is going to say, or how to change the encounter sideways to surprise everybody, right?
Yeah. I played it over 2 sessions. Chris Snezak, former co-host with me of Down with D&D, ran it online via Roll20. And Roll20 wasn't used to position characters. It was used to count currencies.
Yeah.
Right. So which you said you needed a visualization of. Yeah. That's what we used Roll20 for, was to put things on the action tracker and keep track of that. And we played the very day that we first played. We played last Wednesday and then the Wednesday before. The first Wednesday we played, they put out the 1.3 version like hours before we started. So Chris did his best to integrate those into our play test, but there were still things that were a little up in the air at that point.
Sure.
And Chris is an amazing game master who is used to playing D&D and all of the indie games that this game borrows from. Yeah. So, and all of our players, including Jared Rasher, who awesome. Is a friend of our show, are used to playing those sorts of games. So we fell into the rhythm very easily. And we didn't do initiative, right? We did it as it was said to play, not even the addended rules. This was whoever wants to go can go. Yeah. And it went incredibly well. And in fact, usually if I play an online game, after about an hour, I'm checked out. The first day we did a 1 hour character creation and then a 2 hour play of half of the adventure. And I was focused the entire time. And at first I thought, I'm just focused because it's a new game and I'm learning it. And what I realized was I usually check out during combat because I know it's not my turn. And unless I have a character that can use reactions all the time to do things, I'm just sort of, my mind wanders. With this, my mind was always on task because either A, I could go at any time, or B, the monsters could go at any time depending on the roll. Yeah. And that roll could mean they don't get to go for a long time, or that they get to go immediately after every turn. depending on how the dice
Yeah.
fall.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that really kept me engaged with the game. Even the 3-hour session, I was right there the entire time.
I noticed something like that in fourth edition. That's on the early adventures that were run out at conventions. I would notice that people would stay focused because there was so much stuff you could do off turn, and you might lend or need to remind someone of a thing that you did. You might lend a bonus. You might remind them of a previous bonus. You might take an interrupt based on something. And so suddenly, like, we're in third edition, it's like, oh, that player's gonna do their power attack cheese combo thing, and I'm gonna go to the bathroom. And in fact, one of the things that came up was people saying, like, can we take a bathroom break because like we need to stop or I can't leave the table. And that it is really interesting that there is something you can do in role playing game design to cause that interaction, right, where people want to stay focused and aware. And that's a good point. Yeah.
So let's get into the core system, what this game does. It starts with the duality dice. And on Demiplane, it says right at the bottom of your character sheet, duality. And when you click that, it brings up the different ways that you can roll dice. The main way you're going to roll dice is when you try to do something, when you make a die roll or take an action, you roll two 12-sided dice. One of the 12-sided dice is hope. One of the 12-sided dice is fear. So one represents hope, one represents fear. When you take an action, you're going to roll. You're going to add those two numbers together, add whatever stat bonuses you get from it, and then you're trying to beat a target number. If you tie or beat that target number, you succeed. However, you have to see which of the two dice are higher. If the hope die is higher, you succeeded with hope. That means you get to add a hope to your character sheet, and you can spend that resource later.
Yeah.
If you succeed with fear, you still succeed, but that gives the game master the currency to do something. It may be to bank that fear as a fear point to be spent later, or they could take an action immediately because you succeeded with fear. Yeah. And of course, if you roll below the target number, then you fail, and the game master gets to make a move right then.
Yeah.
Any thoughts there?
I mean, it's a really neat concept. When I first read this, I was so excited because I think it's really cool. Right? That idea that every role sort of has a concept to it, hope or fear. And in fact, as you read over the character sheet, you see like, okay, when I generate hope, that's a resource I can use. So I'm very excited when I do this. So just the act of rolling can carry this sort of excitement or dread. And the GM has a reason to get excited about your roll as well. That's really cool. I think that where it gets complicated is knowing what to do with that fuel. And here's a case where I would have guessed that if you just told me this part, I would think, okay, that is the hugest thing about this game. And then it's going to be something really narrative around how I use hope and fear. But no, it's meaty and defined and interconnected. And that I think was the part that was surprising to me.
Yeah.
And not the only system.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting mathematically to figure out how often are you going to fail, assuming a generic target score that you're trying to succeed. It's also interesting because the game master, when they attack, roll a d20 and not 2d12. And I'm not a math wizard, but I know that the average of 2d12 is 13. And I know the average roll on a 20-sider is 10.5. So right there, the math is not wrong because the system in which it works is its own system. But it shows, and it sort of played out in my limited playtest, that we failed very infrequently. And the game master succeeded quite infrequently on his rolls. And there was a point where we probably not just succeeded, but succeeded with hope, probably like 8 times in a row, which means that we're banking hope. The game master's not banking any fear. and the game master does not have the currency to make a move,
Mhm.
except there is the game master can spend 2 actions, so pull 2 actions off the action tracker after we've made them to create a fear. But even then, they need 2 fear to be able to
Mm.
interrupt. So it got to the point where I did not feel threatened because of the way we were rolling. Our success sort of compounded itself to the point where the point of the game, the point of the math here is there will always be a chance for the game master to go. My
Yeah.
question is that chance high enough for it to be an interesting game?
Well, and I had the exact opposite situation.
Right.
When we played with Tom, we kept rolling with fear and we kept missing. So
Uh-huh.
it was like we'd come up with these plans, right? And person one would go, and you think like, and then this thing will happen. But no, the GM gets to go. And the GM does this thing to you. And then like, okay, the next person finally goes, they roll fear or fail. Okay, well, the GM goes again. And so it actually was very choppy where the DM
Right.
was surprisingly strong. And we had no flow to the things we were doing. And then the question is, well, is this good? Right? Like, is
Mhm.
this
Yeah.
and I would have thought if you tell me, well, we're not going to roll a d20 because that's such a swingy die. We're going to do
Mhm.
2d12 so that you have a bell curve and so that things are more dependable. Well, so much for that because
Yeah.
of this extra little bit of the hope fear mechanic, right? It
Yeah.
actually throws you back into more possibilities of swinginess when you half the time are going to roll with fear. Then
Right.
you've got another another piece in
Yeah.
the works, right?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about hope and fear.
Yeah.
So, hope is a resource that can be spent on character abilities for one character to help another or to add one of your experiences to a role.
Mm-hmm.
And your experience is going to be a part of your character that gives you a bonus on rolls if you use it. So, hope is this resource that you can build up, but you need to spend to power certain things. And then fear is a GM resource that the GM can use to do various things, which we'll talk about probably not this time, but next time.
Yeah.
And what I noticed sort of mathematically was my big spell as a sorcerer, I needed to spend 2 hope to use. So I was like hoarding hope uh,
Uh-huh.
so I could do that. But then I realized that, if you use your hope to assist someone, which doesn't cost you action, you can just do it at any point, as long as you can narratively say how, then you get to roll your hope die. The person you're helping gets to roll their hope die, and then
Mm-hmm.
they roll their fear die normally. It's essentially having advantage. And if they make their roll with hope, they get a hope, which they could then use to help you next time, so I felt like we were at first hoarding hope because we realized that it's a resource, whereas all along we should have been helping each other every time
Mm.
because that doubles the chance that you are going to either crit, which is if you roll the same number on both dice, that doubles the chance you're going to succeed with hope, which then you can use, you could keep spending it
I
and
keep doing
gaining
it.
it more easily. And so I'm like, I need our math people on our Discord to check that out for me
And
to see if it makes sense to always help someone with hope.
and what does the help do now?
Help allows you to roll your hope die, to help someone else. So it essentially gives
Okay.
advantage to the roll.
Yeah, because
And
before it was they changed that. Help used to be spend one hope, they get a D6, which was advantage. And
yeah,
now it's a D12.
now
Yeah, that
it's,
does really change things. So I did not play with that, which is that's a big change. Huh.
yeah. So, that's just one more element of it. Because since we were playing with 1.3 the whole time, I never knew that rolling the D6 was the help in this situation.
Yeah.
And so that changes one small change, right? But
Yeah.
it's a pretty dramatic change.
And they may need to undo that. That's great. So on
Yeah.
my end, so you have your sorcerer with those big helps. So I played the
Mhm.
the frog rogue pre-gen, and I didn't make any changes to it. I just used the one that was there. And
Mhm.
in the 1.2 rules, what I could do with hope was I could gain a I could give myself more sneak attack, but I had to spend the hope before my attack. So if I've
Mhm.
missed, nothing, right?
Mhm.
I could give myself a bonus to either attacks or skills based on my being hidden with they don't see me coming feature. Spend a hope to
Mhm.
do that again before the roll, +2 to the roll. I had strike a deal, which sort of negotiation skills, spend a hope, get
Mhm.
+1 to that. Um, and so a lot of what I was really doing, I just assumed that, well, sometimes I would use it to attack, but more than anything else, I would use it to fuel more sneak attack dice on the
Mhm.
hope of a big hit. Um, but a lot of times I might get away with that, but I still had fear, and the GM was still generating that currency, at least in our particular combat, because we just had such bad luck with it. I
Yeah.
mean, really, every time for almost the entire combat, it was either we missed or we
Mhm.
rolled with fear.
Yeah.
So I ran out of hope, and we all were running out of hope because of that sort of situation, right?
Yeah.
There are some things that you can do, like at least back in the 1.2, you could mark stress and give a hope to somebody, right? So there were some things you could do like that, but it was low hope for us, and we did not chain it like you guys seem to.
Yeah. And so you have hit points, you have armor, you have damage thresholds, and you have evasion.
Yeah.
So those are four different things that represent a similar idea, which is how hard is it to hit you and how much damage can you take once you're hit. So evasion is the score used to see if you are hit. So if that number is met or exceeded, you are hit and you take damage.
Mm-hmm.
Then the damage is rolled, but the damage you take isn't the hit points you subtract. There are three thresholds. So if you take between, say, 1 and 6 points of damage, you take 1 hit point of damage.
Yeah.
If you take from 7 to 14 points of damage, that's 2 hit points of damage. And then above that is 3 hit points
3.
of
Yeah.
damage. So it's a gated system of damage. So you could do 7,000 points of damage,
Yeah.
but using the base rules as I understand them, the most you can do is 3 hit points of
Yeah.
damage, which is an interesting concept.
Well, and then to make it tactically even more complicated is armor, right? So
Mhm.
you get these armor points, and the armor points are something that you could. It's the idea that your armor is getting sort of damaged over time, but you can use it to lower the threshold of the damage that you take and drop yourself down into another category so that you go from 3 hit points to 2 or whatever. Um,
Mhm.
and at least in the version I played, you could spend an armor point to reduce incoming damage by 3, and you could spell multiple points.
Mhm.
And that was interesting. It was fun, but it meant that when you're getting attacked, especially early on, but even towards the end and when I got used to it, you still like I had to make myself a cheat sheet, and I
Mhm.
had to work off of that every time I got hit to think, okay, am I spending armor? Or do I not? And some of it I did because this is what my character would do. Like I have a high evaluation of myself, so I'm just going to not take damage. I'm going to spend 2 armor,
Mhm.
even if that's maybe spending my reserves up front. It's what I would do. But still, it's
Mhm.
this calculus that had to happen versus just saying you're hit, you take 5 points of damage. It was this kind of thought
Mhm.
process, right?
Yeah. And the damage that you would get to subtract was based on the armor type that you were wearing.
Mm.
So for
Yeah.
some people it might be 1, some people it might be 2, some people it might be 3. I'm sure it might go higher. Haven't, like I said, I haven't read the rules yet,
Mm-hmm.
but so there's one calculation that you need to make each and every time. And the number of hit points that you have, like my character started with 7 hit points. So that might not sound like a lot. To some people, it may sound like a lot, but in this gated system, it depends. You could take 3 hit points on a single, like almost half of your hit points in a single blow if you took damage that it was up around that severe, above that severe threshold. Uh, the last bit of thing to track, at least in terms of just the base rules, is stress.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a resource that could be used to power character abilities, and sort of track not damage, but it's like a secondary damage track almost.
Yeah.
So if you fill your stress track, you become vulnerable, and then all rolls targeting you have advantage while you're vulnerable. So here's one more bit of currency that you
Mm-hmm.
need to keep track of. We've got stress, we've got hope, we've got armor slots, we've got hit points. And then there's some things where you can put tokens on your card and spend those tokens separate from other abilities or currencies, depending on the power
Yeah.
and the class that you have. So that's just the base rules
Yeah.
and those sorts of things.
And stress is interesting because on one hand, it's sort of like one of these, many games have this sort of second track, mental kind of angle of to track. And that's neat. I think in the first version of the rules, if you took low enough damage, you actually took a stress, not a hit point. They got rid of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you do things like when my character could choose whenever I attacked, I could take a stress to attack a second target within range. Really powerful, but I start filling up that track. Or I could attack with my tongue as a frog person, and
Right.
that did slightly more damage, D12 instead of D8 damage. So that was a choice, but stress. And that's a lot of times this sort of straight trade off on things that you can choose to do with stress, and it's all fine and good. And this all ties into then resting. Resting, when you're going to rest, you're going to be able to do some things, but not all the things. But you can cover other party members. So if you're all very hurt, you're not going to all be able to fix all your things like your armor or your stress or your hit points. But if you're in good shape and you say you only needed to get some stress back and some hit points, well, now you're all set. Or if you only need to do one of those, well, you can help a buddy. And that was another interesting part of the calculus of whether you spend these points. And in the back of my mind as I played was, do they want me doing all this calculus? Because isn't this a narrative game? And this is feeling really tactical, right? Like, should I literally in the middle of combat say, hey, wait, does anyone have an open thing for the next rest so that I can just take stress because I currently don't have any? Like, should I be thinking that?
Yeah.
It's driving two types of play at the same time, but the one can't quite coexist with the other, right? This narrative and this tactical.
That's why the marketing of this is so interesting to me, because as you say, it's sort of trying to marry two worlds. And for the people who are just used to watching Critical Role, who maybe have never even played a role-playing game or maybe dabbled in D&D a bit, this is something new. Will they be able to grok the complexity of it? If you market it to D&D players, you might get D&D players who say, oh, cool, look at all of this story stuff that I don't have in my D&D. I get to make my experiences, and these experiences I can spend hope or spend stress to add to my role because of who I am. If they've never played Fate or never played 13th Age or never played some of these games that already have this, they might think it's revolutionary, but it's really not.
Sure.
And the people who already know all of these things I already incorporate some of this stuff into my own games, right? I already take some of this stuff. Like your background will actually have more of a mechanical benefit than just you get these things. So it's an odd mix. There's nothing wrong with it. It's intriguing how it will be marketed toward these different audiences.
Yeah. Well, and I'll give an example of some of this. Like, I can see Matt Mercer wanting to say in a game, tell you what, if you take a stress, I'll let you do the following. And that's in a narrative game, right? And when I think of 13th Age, I cannot help but think of Rob Hainsou as DM, where he will give you devil's bargains all the time. if you do this thing, you can do this other thing. And that makes it super narrative and super fun because it's all about you and the situation in the now. But when the game is pretty toothy like this, when it's got that complexity and that fine level of detail, anything Matt Mercer or your DM offers you, you have to kind of go like, well, don't the rules already say X and Y and Z? Like, why are you giving me? Are you breaking the rules right now? What's happening? When the game is open, like in Fade or in any of these other kind of more open games, well, then it's really easy to make these kinds of offers because it's not this fine grit detail level, right?
Yeah. And then it needs to work on a level of, can it be broken so that I'm always full of hope and stress free? Because I've got this figured out to a point where I can work together with this other class, where I take a stress to give them hope, and they take a hope to give me stress, or vice right, and we can just work it out every round back and forth, so that I always have 6 hope, which is the most you can have, and I never have any stress because we have this method of keeping it just rotating. And so that's why it's got to work mechanically as well as narratively, as well as marketing wise. So
too true.
now I want to add this one thing. We've been talking about the things you can use stress for, things you can use hope for. We haven't covered everything, but you have abilities given to you by your class and your subclass and your ancestry and your community, at least. So I have, for the character I created, my ancestry gives me 2 things I can do. My community gives me 2 things I can do. My subclass gives me 1 thing I can do that has 4 different choices. And without even taking any powers yet, my class gives me 3 things I can do. Some of them use stress, some of them use hope, but they're all, so that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 things that I have to think about before I even look at my powers that my class gave me that I chose. So that's a lot for me. I loved it. I loved going through and saying, oh, if I did this, I could strike down a fear by using 2 stress, or I could turn this fear into hope by taking this. And it was really fun and to think about mechanically. But that's a lot. That's a lot for a second level character.
Yeah. And a lot to climb initially to get your feeling of how to play your character, to where you feel good about your character and your character. It also tends to be, while it has flavor to it, it felt very mechanical to me overall and tactical, versus other games I've played where I felt like everything I read, like if I take something like Tales from the Loop, everything felt story first, mechanical second. Right, where first and foremost, this is what my kid believes based on where they are in high school or middle school or whatever. And that's why I'm doing things, not because of the +2 or the +1, because there's so little going on mechanically that the play is the thing, right? The narrative is the thing. And here, again, there's a lot of that duality is sort of fighting itself. And so to what extent am I worried about my background as a story concept versus a mechanical concept, and I felt they fought each other a bit.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. It has that storytelling aspect, but it is very much hidden behind a lot of choices.
And the character sheet to make. Right? When you look, the character sheets are great. And one of the things that's really awesome is they give you this 1-page document that you can print and put next to the character sheet. It has sort of a dividing mark, and you slide it over here and it tells you what all those things do. And you slide over there and it shows you what the other half of the character sheet does. That's really neat. Great for learning the game. But the character sheet itself is a very sort of mechanical kind of character sheet, rather than a story-centered one, right? If I compare it again to something like Tales from the Loop, if you look at those pre-gens, like, boy, that's all just, like, you look at them and you kind of smile because like, oh, I get what this kid's all about, and I'm excited to play this person, right? Like this personality. Looking at my rogue character sheet, and I'm looking at it right now. Um, this is about features, and I don't know what any of them, not any of them, but many of them I don't quite understand without reading the rules. And that's how you know that it's not just a narrative game, right? Is you can't just play off of what this is. It's like, well, what does don't see me coming? What does +2 mean? What does, my major damage, blah, 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 all those things. You have to, they're all mechanical, tactical bits, which I found is very interesting.
I wanted to say one more thing about gameplay. When you take a class, you get 2 domains. And those domains come with cards, which give you powers. And you have to choose a certain number of those powers. You can choose them for all from one domain if you wanted, but you can mix and match. And to me, this was 4th edition, right? It was a little 4th edition and a little Gloomhaven, if you've ever played Gloomhaven. And my thought was, okay, cool, cards. I love cards. I love, holding them in front of me and choosing them. And then Beautiful I thought, art. What's the difference? Yeah. What's the difference between a sorcerer and a rogue in this system? I'm casting spells. I'm doing magic damage. The rogue is probably not casting spells and probably doing physical damage. But in terms of the play, we're doing the same thing, right? We're spending hope or we're spending stress to do things. And in the long run, it's not I'm learning from a spell book. It's not it's just sort of, it's the same game no matter which class I play. And 4E got crucified for that.
Sure, it really did.
Is this going to get crucified the same way for having every class mechanically sort of be similar?
I said this before, and I still think it's a big question, which is this a game from Critical Role and Darrington Press, or is this the RPG, the Critical Role RPG from Darrington Press? Right. Recently, they played, as I understand it, I didn't watch it, but Critical Role played one of their 5e games and then used Daggerheart for part of it, which is really kind of neat, smart idea. But, it makes you wonder, like, would Critical Role switch to this, or is this just a game? If it's just a game, this is a great game. This is a lot of fun. I think it'll be super engaging. I would totally play this, especially once the things get sanded down. I mean, I love this kind of thinking, and I love power cards, and so there's no problem. But I don't know that it has the mass appeal that it could have, right? I think that within everything I see here, there could be a slightly different take that would be far more appealing to more players and would avoid some of those issues you're talking about. And it could still have cards, and it could still have lots of things, but it's sort of doing too much. And if it could find what to pare down, it would be a really strong game that could maybe be the Critical Role game. But maybe they have an entirely different game in mind for that. I don't know, right? I'm fascinated by that question.
That's true. Well, I think we've covered everything there is to cover about the core rules and the core system of Daggerheart. Next time, we'll talk about the characters and about the action tracker and how the game flow and how the game loop works. Thank you out there in the world for everyone listening to us ramble on about this hobby we love. Special thank yous go out to our Master of Dungeon supporters who support our Patreon. Also, a special shout out to our Master of Realm supporters are in our show notes. You know who you are. Now, Masters of the Multiverse, those patrons, y'all are going to know who they are because I'm going to read their names right now. Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios. Craig Bailey, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Evil John, Andy Edmonds at NerdroNamicon.com. Nathan Fuller, The Mighty Jerd, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Sean Hurst, Chad Jackson, Brian King, Jim Klingler, a.k.a. DM Prime Mover, Chad Lynch, The Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, John Mickey, Sean Molly, Falcon Neal, Tom Nelson, creator of The Deck of Player Safety, Mike Olson, Mighty Zeus, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Prunner from Croatia, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Ross Sandberg, Andy Shockney, Krishna Simose, Jeremy Taluman, from the D&D and TV podcast. Trace, Joe Tyler, James Walton, Graham Ward, Javier Wozniak, Chris Webster, and David Bastianson. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. You can become a patron of the show too, just like these fine folks. You can do so, and you can support us and our work by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. If you can't help us financially, we completely understand that. You could help us out by going to Apple Podcast or via whatever means that you listen to this podcast and giving us a review, because that tells the rest of the RPG world out there that Teos and I are at least mildly entertaining and or what's the word? Good with words. Yeah, that. Also,
Can't
you
think of
can
it.
subscribe. There you go. You can subscribe via YouTube, which is youtube.com/@masteringdungeons, and leave us some comments or questions at the YouTubes. Teos, you've been busy lately. Where can people find your work? What you been up to?
alphastream.org. My latest is looking back 1 year ago was the D&D Summit, a little over that, and what was done, what was actually accomplished, and what is still on the to-do list. Spoiler, there's a lot on the to-do list. But also I've been kind of paralleling our discussion of campaigns and sharing some of my thoughts on campaigns. So Friday I posted about that. And the next piece will be looking at how to easily pick up a different RPG, the new RPG you're not familiar with.
Awesome. You can find my stuff on the social medias at Shawn Merwin, or you can find the podcast on all the social medias at Mastering D&D. Join our community, ask questions via Patreon, go to that YouTube channel, let us know what you think. And so now that we are at least sort of versed in not Dragonheart, but Daggerheart, what are we going to do now?
We're gonna play Dragonbane and Daggerheart simultaneously, creating Daggerbane.
Heartbane.
Ooh.
Ooh.